The Star Wars franchise has had many video games throughout its history, from vast role-playing games to online multiplayer battles to linear narrative-driven adventures. It's surprising that Star Wars Outlaws is the first open-world Star Wars game. Sort of. There are Star Wars games with open environments which allow freedom of movement, choice and direction, but none of them are quite like this one. At the front of Star Wars Outlaws is Kay Vess, a young woman attempting to become one of the titular Outlaws. Why she wants to do that is a bit of a mystery, for the game doesn't really say. There are a couple of brief flashbacks throughout its 20-hour run that touch on Kay's mother and her relationship with her pet and psychic, Nyx. But there's not a lot in the story or in interactions with other characters that really explain who Kay is. We know early on that she was raised by a thief, sharing many of the skills her mother passed down to her. One can speculate that she looked up to and perhaps admired her mother and therefore wished to live a life like hers. But it's unclear if this is the case, especially when the flashbacks also reveal a turbulent relationship between the two of them. It can also be assumed that this is simply the only life she's ever lived, in which case Kay's path is one dictated by circumstance rather than choice. Regardless, her lack of clear motivation and backstory makes Kay a tough protagonist to root for or care for. Luckily, the performance and dialogue make her likeable enough in the moment. She's a rookie in the outlaw trade. At many times she barely has any idea what she's doing. This provides some comedic levity and serves as a decent introduction to many of the game's systems, mechanics and structure. But it does make Kay seem like a naive, slightly idiotic character at times. It's hardly the coolest scenario imaginable. And there's a little bit of Han Solo about her as well. It could also be said that the lack of definitive backstory, motivation and characterization allows the player to imbue their own ideas and personality into the avatar of Kay. That would work on a gameplay level, as you can make Kay whoever you want her to be, but it doesn't work on a story or character level because it's hard to care for someone you don't know or understand. The story, meanwhile, is also a little underwhelming and at times problematic. It doesn't get off to a strong start. There's a lack of energy and excitement in the opening moments because the game is so focused on introducing mechanics and systems rather than establishing a solid, intriguing plot. In short, Kay tries to rob a high roller, fails for reasons, and then must go on the run, befriending syndicates and eventually deciding to form a team capable of accomplishing the opening heist. It's not the most nuanced, original or depth-filled story ever. In fact, if you were to mainline the story instead of exploring all the open worlds have to offer, the story would probably last less than 10 hours. It's on the short side. Once Kay's goal is firmly established and the structure is revealed, the game becomes far more interesting. It just takes a little long to get to this point. Like Mass Effect 2, much of the story revolves around Kay recruiting members for the heist team. You meet them, often have to get them out of their precarious situation, earn their loyalty, and then you move on to the next one. It's a fun way of allowing you to traverse the galaxy, visiting a variety of locations and getting to know about the larger state of affairs. Sadly, the supporting characters are about as interesting as Kay herself. Many of them are cliche-ridden and one-note. There's a quirky, somewhat worrisome explosions expert. There's a dry, stoic droid, a friendly, physically inept mechanic, and that's about it without going into spoilers on further characters in the game. Imagine a criminal or a gangster, a rogue or a snobbish villain, and you have the cast of Star Wars Outlaws summed up perfectly. It's very disappointing that in a galaxy full of fun characters and aliens, that this game doesn't really feature any of them. The characters don't get a lot of time to shine and have very few moments to really flesh themselves out. Once recruited, you can engage in some short conversations with them aboard your ship, often adding some details to their backstory, but there's not a lot of discussion to be had between you and them. They're there to fulfill a role, not to be your friend. Over the course of the story, you will meet and engage with some familiar names, faces, places and events from the Star Wars franchise. I won't spoil too many of them here, but the familiar names and faces make questionable appearances. Why does Lando Calrissian need to be in this game? Why is Crimson Dawn in this game? Yes, a game focusing on the Outlaws of Star Wars ought to at least mention them, but if you've read the Star Wars comic books set during this period, you'll know that Lando and Crimson Dawn were very busy during this period. So their inclusion here makes the timeline a little messy. Additionally, there are moments in which the story veers very close to the main Skywalker saga. that of the rebels versus the Empire. One of the joys of being in a game solely focused on the Outlaws is that it's a chance to escape that very familiar story. Outlaws manages to keep itself away from it for the most part, but often feels too closely attached to it anyhow, sometimes venturing into predictable, unoriginal storytelling without fully embracing it. It's a bit of a shame that this story doesn't always work as a total standalone tale in the Star Wars galaxy. When not watching cutscenes or following the story, you'll be doing a variety of activities, from sneaking through Syndicate hideouts, to flying through asteroid belts, to battling the Empire in gunfights, traversing mountainsides, breaking locks, hacking computers, playing sabacc, and more. The game offers plenty of variety in gameplay, but the amount of variety comes with a big drawback. Star Wars is, in many ways, a jack of all trades, master of none, for lack of a better term. Stealth is the main form of play you'll be partaking in. You must sneak through enemy bases using vents, ladders, your trusty binoculars, and nicks to distract enemies. The stealth is very much like past Ubisoft games such as Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed. You can crouch behind cover, wait for the right opportunity to move. You can disable or trap alarm systems. You can make nicks distract or attack enemies, allowing you to move through undetected. And you can sneak up on enemies, stunning them with a rechargeable shot of your blaster, or simply knock them out with Kay's impressive fists of steel. The stealth is fine, it works, but there's nothing new or unique to the stealth mechanics of Star Wars Outlaws. In fact, it feels a little stripped back. You can't, for example, move or hide bodies. Light and shadow makes no difference to how hidden you are, and sound plays very little a part in it either. It often feels very basic, perhaps to appease those who aren't wanting a stealth-driven experience or those who just aren't good at it. At the same time, the stealth can be challenging. Many of the stealth sequences come with the strict instructions such as don't get caught and don't trigger an alarm. You'd probably expect an open world game to react to either of those situations should they happen. If you were to get caught, enemies would become alert and you would either run, hide or fight. No, not in Star Wars Outlaws. In Star Wars Outlaws, if you get caught or if an alarm is triggered in these instances, the screen fades to black and you must start the sequence again. And that can be frustrating if you spend 10 minutes or so slowly sneaking through enemy territory only to have to do it all again. It should be noted that a recent patch has supposedly improved upon some of these instances. Outside of the main narrative focused stealth areas, the stealth is less punishing and the world and characters do react more in line with other games of its genre. Another big detraction of the stealth is that it's usually very linear. With only a few exceptions throughout the game, to sneak into an enemy location or hideout there's only ever one route to take, especially on the main story missions. This and the linearity of the other aspects of the game often beg the question of why is Star Wars Outlaws an open world game? While it could be on the shorter side as a linear action-adventure game, many of its side missions and content don't always feel all that essential, and the main missions and scenarios are nearly always more engaging and exciting too. When stealth fails, action is the go-to gameplay method. Here, Kay has her trusty blaster, and that's it. You can upgrade your blaster to fire a variety of different shot types, from single fire to rapid fire, power shots and ion shots for droids and shields. These modules help mix it up, but Kay's blaster rarely feels all that satisfying, and even the power shots often lack a sense of oomph. You can pick up enemy weapons such as snipers, grenade launchers and more advanced blasters, but Kay can only wield them for so long. Once she's out of shots, she's forced to drop the weapon and resume using her own blaster again. I understand that the developers want Kay to have her own personal iconic weapon, the same way a Jedi has their own lightsaber, but it makes for some very limited combat scenarios, and ones that are often lacking in excitement because of the blaster's less than good feel. You can also engage in hand-to-hand combat. In stealth, you can sneak up on enemies and take them down with a swift chop to the back of the head or a fist to the helmeted face, or you can run right up to them and deliver a gruesome combo. There's not a lot to hand-to-hand combat, and it should only be considered as a last resort. But Kay is given an unusual amount of strength, as she's capable of knocking out the biggest, toughest and most heavily armoured of individuals with just a couple of blows. It's impressive, useful, but also incredulous. Outside of missions, exploration takes on many forms. On foot, you can climb and jump. There are challenges such as treasure hunts that require some platforming and slight puzzle traversal. These elements are very much akin to the Uncharted games, where simple button presses and a push in the right direction take you where you need to go. If you're in a bit of a hurry, there's always Kay's Speeder. This is your only ground method of transportation. You can't steal other vehicles or speeders. You can, however, upgrade your own, altering its paint job, accessories and capabilities. The Speeder shares the iconic sounds of those of the movies and shows, as well as the sense of speed and adrenaline that comes with riding such a vehicle. The upgrades, however, feel very incremental and at times unnecessary, especially when the game around you isn't always capable of rendering fast enough or just running when you're whizzing through the environment at top speed. In space, you have the Trailblazer, Kay's ship and home. The Trailblazer is very much like the Speeder but with more weapons, and as such, much more fun. You can customize it the same way with the addition of different missiles, turrets and torpedoes. You can make the ship do whatever you want or require. When traveling either in space or on the ground, you might get ambushed or attacked by pirates or a rival syndicate. This allows for some brief battles. Those in space are fun, and thanks to simple mechanics and lock-on features, the space battles never become disorientating, nor do they ever feel like too much. On ground, your options are more limited. One of Kay's abilities, on and off the Speeder, is that of a slowdown mechanic that allows you to lock on to up to 5 targets and then very quickly blast them away. It's the mark and execute mechanic from the later Splinter Cell games. On foot, it works well, allowing for some cool shootout moments once you've built up enough adrenaline. On the Speeder, it's more annoying because it's your only method of attack. This means you must either evade or speed away from attackers until the meter builds up, and then you very quickly and rather unsatisfyingly dispatch your foes. Unless you just stop, hop off the Speeder and face them on foot instead. Not having a unique method of attack on the Speeder seems like a big oversight and misstep. The worlds you explore are colourful and vibrant, with plenty of avenues for exploration, hidden locations and a lot of side missions and content. There are 3 open environments: Tashara, a newly made planet that is inspired by the African plains, Tatooine, the desert planet of the movies and shows, and Akiva, a jungle location featured in some of the expanded canon. Each of these locations has a distinct vibe and look. Tashara and Tatooine are my favourite of the 3, thanks to more open locations and a greater sense of choice and freedom. Akiva, meanwhile, is a jungle planet that often appears to be made up of very linear, limited paths and roads. It's odd for an open environment to not be all that open, and the jungle itself isn't all that interesting either. On a high-end PC, Akiva was also tough to play through, with some poor optimization and notable frame rate drops. You can also visit Kijimi and Kanto Bight. Kanto Bight serves as a very linear, story-focused section at the front and back end of the game, while Kijimi is a small city made up of snowy streets and alleys. It's open, but it doesn't always feel like it. What really works well in the open areas is the way in which you attain information and knowledge. There are plenty of ways to be distracted in Star Wars Outlaws. If you travel down a street in Kijimi, for example, you can take a seat at the local food stand and engage in an eating minigame. Or you can listen in on a conversation to discover the location of hidden treasure. Or you can watch as a pair of stormtroopers abuse a local stall owner. You can even learn about and bet on Favier races and discover that they're nearly all fixed. The open world of Star Wars Outlaws feels lived in and immersive. It presents information and it encourages exploration and discovery in ways few other open world games have. It feels very natural, layered and detailed. It's this that really pushes Outlaws into being more fun than its many individual parts. The desire to uncover every secret, to find every treasure and to see what's going on in the galaxy is a compelling one. Even if the gameplay itself isn't always the most entertaining thing ever, it is competent enough and enjoyable enough to allow engagement into what is the fun stuff. Side missions are mostly very classic fetch quests. You get a mission or some intel from speaking to or from overhearing someone, you visit the location mentioned, and then you do something. That something could be a gunfight or a hacking minigame. The minigames of Star Wars Outlaws are fun, but are perhaps a touch overutilized. There's a lockpicking mechanic that requires a good sense of rhythm. You must click a button in time with a sound working to a pattern. It takes some figuring out, and even then it's still tough to master. Then there's a hacking minigame that's essentially Wordle but with Star Wars symbols. These minigames are fun, but they often show up in abundance, occasionally ruining a sense of urgency and pace with whatever is going on at the moment. They can, however, be turned off or simplified within the game's many accessibility options. Then there's Sabacc. Sabacc is the main card game of the Star Wars franchise, but not the only one. In simple terms, it's a cross between poker and blackjack. The aim is to achieve a pair of the lowest numbers possible. Additional perks and cards mix it up a touch, but Sabacc never feels all that challenging once you get the hang of it. The last main feature of Star Wars Outlaws is that of the Syndicate reputation meters. Each of the syndicates, Crimson Dawn, the Hutts, the Yashiga, and the Pikes, have a certain stand-in with KVS. Your actions and choices throughout the game, and primarily at the end of missions, will impact your reputation with those syndicates. Befriend them by delivering the goods and intel, and they'll let you into their territory or even grant you access to exclusive items at stores. Turn on them or make them unhappy, and they'll block you access or even attack you on sight. It's a fun element that adds some challenge and dimension to your adventures in the galaxy, but it never feels all that important or significant. It doesn't have any impact on the story, for example, and beyond making them happy or mad with you, there's little it does to the overall game. Make enemies of the Pikes early on and you can still work for them later in the game. It's an odd choice to not expand on this and provide some real consequences. It's an underdeveloped, not fully utilised, great idea. The Empire, as you might expect, plays a big part of the game too. They essentially act as the law enforcement of the galaxy. Do too many bad things and you'll get a wanted level. As that wanted level increases, the Empire dispatches bigger and tougher enemies to take you down. It's a cool feature. There are also Empire controlled areas you can sneak into, and these offer great visual differentiation from other open areas of the game. Using binoculars to scout ahead, mark enemies, and then find a sneaky route into the base is sometimes akin to Metal Gear Solid 5, just without the sleek mechanics of that game. Throughout the game you will encounter some highly skilled individuals. The skill tree system of this game is yet another great idea that's not fully realised or executed. Each time you meet a highly skilled person, you'll unlock a new skill tree section with a variety of challenges. Complete a certain challenge or a set of challenges and you unlock a skill, perk or ability. For example, complete a series of challenges for an expert marksperson and you'll be able to lock onto and execute more foes. Do the same for a heavy weapons expert and you'll be able to equip said weapons. The way in which this system works is compelling and gives the impression that Kay herself is learning from those she meets in the open world. But once you unlock the challenges, you never have to meet those individuals again. The game doesn't fully explain just how Kay is learning her skills and abilities, with a few exceptions that are tied closer to the story and associated missions. There's also the issue that many of the skills and abilities feel incremental and not all that necessary. I finished the game with several skills still to unlock, and yet I don't feel compelled to go through hurdles of learning them. Mainly because I doubt I'll need them in any of the future returns to the Star Wars galaxy. Playing on PC, the game was initially riddled with bugs and glitches. I had 2 or 3 hard crashes, there were texture losses whenever my wanted level increased too high, the frame rate constantly dropped for unexplained reasons, certain events and missions wouldn't always trigger, and occasionally there would be no sound. Additionally, frame generation and ray reconstruction didn't always work as expected, rendering the game an occasionally blurry mess. A patch released while I was playing the game did correct some of these issues, but many remain. Star Wars Outlaws is full of great locations, ideas and concepts, but many of those ideas and concepts are lacking in originality or mastering. In fact, the whole game often feels like a jack of all trades, master of none. Its stealth and combat are fine and enjoyable enough, but aren't always the most fun thing ever. The open worlds are packed with things to do, but don't always allow you the freedom or choice to do them how you want, and the story and characters simply aren't all that interesting. However, while many of the game's individual elements rarely reach a certain level of fun or mastery, the gameplay loop of taking on missions, sneaking through bases and merely being in an open Star Wars environment is always fun and engaging and engrossing.